Welcome in, folks, to another great episode of I've Got a Theory. I'm your host, Henish. I'm excited to have on my guest and also a fan of the podcast, Adrian Lucio. Adrian, nice to meet you, and thanks for joining me.
Yeah, it's great to meet you too. Hi, glad to be here.
So, we were chatting before the show, and he told me that he's about to be a future college dropout, and
hmm
he's also going to be a future author. And he's writing a book called Demystifying Physics, and
Right.
that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I love that because I didn't mention this, Adrian, but I did really good in physics in high school,
hmm
and for some reason I didn't pursue it and became more of a liberal arts sales business guy.
Right.
But I'm enamored by it. I love physics. I understood it well. I did really well at it. I got it. I understood the formulas,
hmm
and so it's interesting that you're doing a book called Demystifying Physics, because I know the struggle is real, because I'd have to tutor my other classmates and stuff like that to explain to them how, you know, force equals mass times acceleration and things like
Yeah,
that, just like
exactly.
basic stuff like that. So with that being said, so I'm not a complete novice when it comes to physics. We can kind of talk at a higher level, and I'll
hmm
try to dumb it down for things that get out of the common person scope, and then maybe you need to dumb
Right.
it down for me because I'm out of practice 20 plus years of uh, physics equations.
Right. No
But yeah,
worries.
tell me what your theory is. Tell me what you're thinking.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess my overall theory is that science and like by and large physics shouldn't be behind like this gateway or this restriction in a way, because a lot of the time people perceive physics and like at a greater state science as being this thing for scholars and people who are of like a certain mentality and a certain thought process. And I feel like there are ways to explain physics in a more conceptual manner where it's more applicable for normal people. And on top of that, it's just overall better to understand. There's no reason to understand like third level calculus for your everyday person. That's not necessary. When
Yeah.
instead they can just learn the concepts and learn how to apply them and understand it on a greater scale.
Yeah, and so and then what? So if we understand physics better, how does that help my day-to-day life? Or are you proposing that people should kind of take this up as a younger person because we need more people that are science focused in the workforce?
Honestly, it's a bit of both. I think
Okay.
mainly towards the first point, it's a thing of just like when you better understand the universe around you and how like certain things function. Like let's say you're a mechanic, right? You're a technician, and you need to better understand how it is that this car functions. Well, even if you're not being taught it in like an academic sense, you're being taught physics because physics is literally a part of every single thing in our universe and every single part of the world. It's how things interact with one another and how things act in general. So the better you understand the different parts of the car, the better you understand like how things interact with one another, the better you can do your job in total, right?
Yeah.
So if instead of understanding just like the basic concepts or like the specific concepts of your job, if you can understand it by and large, like thermodynamics, for example, instead, or friction, kinematics, if you can better understand these like base foundational concepts, then you can apply it on a grander, more advanced way in your day-to-day life.
Such as, can you give me an example? Have you done that recently in your own life?
Sure, yeah. Well, recently, my microwave actually stopped working, and I had to kind of like tinker with it and figure out what was going on with it. And it turns out it just wasn't getting the right wattage because there was a problem with the wiring in the house, which is a whole separate issue. But the way I figured it out was just by thinking to myself, okay, well, I know for a fact that when I like press the keypad, everything's working fine. When I push certain buttons, and everything's fine. The lights are working fine. It was just like this process of I understand that when it comes to this microwave, there's certain forces at work here, such as me applying pressure to anything closing, any mechanisms involved in locking, that kind of stuff. And I knew that they're all working fine because of my background with applied physics and my background of understanding these kind of systems. So I eventually figured out that it was because of the wattage of the outlet, because it was literally the thing just like I tried plugging other things in and seeing if they would also work, and then they weren't. So
So that's how you're figuring it out. So tell me a little bit more about your book. What's some of the main topics that you're covering in that? And how's it organized?
yeah. So the book comes in three main parts. There's part one, which is mainly the relationship of philosophy and science as a whole, like from the very, very first time that, well, not the very first time, but the more familiar aspects of philosophy with like the Greek philosophers and Eastern philosophers as well, explaining how that background and that foundation brings us to where we are today, but can also lend a hand in like reshaping our understanding of science as we see it right now, which is like by and large what I want to do. The second part of the book covers mainly just physics concepts and better breaking them down to show that this process can actually work, that this is not just like a crazy idea that I have, that like it can actually put into practice. The way I do that actually is by, excuse me, is by humanizing physics more, basically by researching and going into where we started from, like not knowing about this concept, about like where the first researchers were of this concept to where we are now, and the progression of that knowledge as it actually happened in real time. And then the third part covers the possible future of physics and like the more interesting, the more like foreign frontier kind of stuff, like quantum mechanics, for example, things like string theory, all that stuff.
Well, let's go there. What's the future of
Sure.
physics look like?
It's insane. Quite frankly, it is literally like mind breaking stuff. You deal with, so basically, when you deal with an atom, right? An atom's like the smallest anything to break down, hypothetically speaking. But in reality, a lot of like physicists know that there's more to it than that, and so do actually most people nowadays, because you understand that there's neutrons, protons, and electrons. But you can actually go even smaller than that into the quantum realm. Now, the quantum realm is where quantum mechanics occurs. These are particles that are in a state of both existence and non-existence, where everything is it's as real as we can perceive it to be, basically, because of how small everything is and how rapidly everything happens. There's no actual way to trace this information, but we understand that there has to be something smaller that acts like in parallel to our own universe, because of how everything operates in our universe, how we perceive everything.
Yeah.
But so quantum mechanics is the future, 100%. There's so many different parts to it. There's quarks. You have quarks and bosons, which are like the particles they deal with in quantum mechanics. You have electromagnetism, which is a part of quantum mechanics because of how light works and the distortion of all of that. Um, and the biggest thing of all is just like there's so many concepts we have today that we think are these staple things that will never change that end up breaking in quantum mechanics, like gravity, for example. Gravity in the realm of quanta does not operate the same way it does in our level of reality,
How
which
does
is
it work?
like,
Because I've dug into this,
mhm.
and from what I understand, the understanding of gravity is murky.
Yes, even in our like day-to-day lives, the understanding of gravity is still a bit weird, just because we've only really seen like large cases of it. We've only ever been able to study how large celestial bodies interact with one another through gravity. Um, so it's very tricky to understand the origins of gravity, what happens when you get smaller and smaller, because observing those like minute effects where it's like a nanometer of difference is incredibly difficult, like nearly impossible to do. So our general understanding of gravity as a whole is warped as well. That most definitely, which is why an
Well,
interesting
warped is the right
conversation.
word, right? Because it's a distortion, is what happens with gravity.
Yeah, yeah. So we currently understand gravity as this effect that will happen no matter what. It's one of the like natural occurring things in our universe that will always happen no matter what. This is the thing that exists. But there are others who propose a different idea of gravity, and others who think that because our understanding of it breaks at certain points, obviously there are parts of it that are unfinished and need to be reevaluated. So some people argue for throwing away our entire idea of gravity. Others argue for better shaping it and refining it.
You know, what's interesting is that for four major forces that we understand in the
Mhm.
universe, there's particles associated with them,
Yeah.
with the exception of gravity.
Mhm. Exactly.
And so gravity, when I've dug into this, has been characterized as a distortion of time,
Mhm.
so that time moves faster the closer you are to a source of large mass, and slower the further you are, which causes you to fall into that time distortion.
Right. Yeah. It's not necessarily the fact that like gravity itself dictates that. It's more a thing of just um, with normal like with normal physics in the universe, you have um, mass dictating matter how to move, right? So
Yeah.
and that's in line with gravity. That's basically how that effect occurs. But so the denser you have an object, the greater gravity it has, and it warps everything else around it in like this well, hence black holes. Including even light. Light will bend into it because light has nowhere else to travel, because light is also still a form of matter. Um, so it's not necessarily the fact that gravity is having the effect of that. It's more along the line of just like um, mass and density are more in line with that. It's just those two reactive forces cause a greater effect of gravity to happen, basically.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's hard to demystify that because we still don't
it
get it.
is.
Even the
Yeah,
smartest people in the world, you think like, oh, Newton figured out gravity 400 years ago. Not
not even
really. He
close.
just described it. He doesn't know how
Mhm.
it works, and so he just
Exactly.
was able to describe it and put some calculations that are kind of generally accepted now. Everyone knows 9.8 meters squared, but that doesn't necessarily mean we understand how it works. And that's just on Earth, right?
Mhm.
And everything else is going to have a different rate of acceleration towards its gravitational pull.
Exactly.
Um, so it's hard to demystify it, but the thing is, like, it was interesting. I was watching Shark Tank last night, and this guy was
Mhm.
talking about how he makes animatronic dinosaurs. And oh, they're like, "Oh, you must have loved dinosaurs as a kid." He's like, "Actually, no. I was a reporter with the Boston Globe, and I
Oh my
did
gosh.
a research. I had to do an article on dinosaurs, and I loved it. And I quit being a reporter, and now I'm a dinosaur geek. And like that's his full time. Like he became like
Oh
a
my gosh.
paleontologist, and then dug up dinosaur bones and has dinosaurs named after him, and has a
Oh
dinosaur
wow.
business that he sold to Shark Tank. Um,
That's incredible.
and so it's interesting that people later in their lives can come to these kind of conclusions, because you hear about that sometimes, right? You hear about
Mhm.
those guys that are retired or in their 40s, 50s, 60s, that they're older, and then all of a sudden they pick up a telescope, and now they're becoming amateur astronomers and finding
Right.
stars and making discoveries that are contributing to the scientific world, and they're not paid researchers at a university, right?
Exactly.
Or they're not part of a government entity. They're just guys that are just in their backyard looking up in the sky and figuring it out. So it's cool that with cloud computing and access to journals and information, that a regular guy, instead of sitting on the couch, could spend a little bit of time in front of his computer and get pretty proficient at this and potentially do something profound.
Exactly.
And so is that kind of what you're kind of going to? Richard Dawkins came out with A Brief History of Time and Space, and this is kind of like another book that's in that class of demystifying physics. You're kind of making basically science for dummies, but at the physics
Yeah.
level, right? Is which what you're
Yeah.
trying to get to is trying to explain different concepts at a level that regular people can understand, and ideally apply to their regular lives, and or stir up an interest to pursue this further. Is that kind of the goal?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the thing you mentioned earlier of like people later in lives rediscovering their passion for these different things or rediscovering like how fascinating they really can be. It's like you could just have that passion when you're younger. If you just teach these things better, if you just better explain these things in a way that's more open, in a way that's um more allowing of people to enter it, basically, right? For lack of a better phrase. Um, then you have more people studying this, you have more people getting involved in this and pushing it further faster. Like the only way science and like by and large people can grow and develop is by being educated, by learning these things. And if you just look at them and say no, you cannot match my scholarly diction, my academic know-how, that's ridiculous. Like you most definitely can explain a majority, if not everything, that has to do with physics through concepts and through just simple language and diction. Like you don't have to understand the like again the calc 3 formula to understand what the physics behind it really means, especially if you're just going to use it in your day-to-day life, or you're going to use it to just like have these interesting thought experiments or these interesting conversations, for example. Like you don't really need that level of in-depth knowledge until you get to that research caliber.
What I loved about physics when I was younger is that it was so objective.
Hmm.
You either know it and it's a black and white answer, or you don't know it and you're going to get it wrong. When
Yeah.
you're doing a quiz or a homework or even an exam or whatever. Um, and it just made so much sense, right? Once you understood the formulas and or could remember them, or sometimes, you'd get open book tests where you'd like, all right, yeah, get access to the formulas, because yeah, that's not like a secret, but then being able to apply it in whatever situation that the professor is testing you on, is relevant. And there's no like, like, I don't like your answer, here's a B.
Hmm.
It's no, I got it right. The answer is this, and that's it.
Yeah.
So it's I like that binariness of
Totally.
physics for what we understand. For the stuff that we don't understand,
It's
it's still a huge world of understanding to come.
yeah,
One of
that's
my
so
guests,
fascinating.
yeah, one of my guests is coming up is this guy named Robert Jacobson. He's wrote this book called Space is Open for Business. And so I'm reading
Hmm.
that right now. But he's basically just talking about all of the different businesses, and he's interviewing all these different CEOs and founders of all these space-based businesses, of all these businesses that are coming out. And he's saying basically space is going to become the biggest industry on the planet
Yeah, absolutely.
for humans, because it's so limitless,
Hmm.
between the mining and the tourism and the interests out there and the technology that has to develop to be out there. It's really incredible where we're at. And with Moore's law, things developing, doubling in speed and doubling in processing power every 18 months. I mean, we're going to see some incredible things in our lives, right? I'm probably double the age you
Yeah.
are, but I still plan to see a lot of double, incredible things in the next 40, 50 years that I'm alive. And it's really incredible. Do you have any predictions about some things that we'll see? Do you think we'll figure out
Oh.
faster than speed of light travel? Do you think we
Oh
can
my
figure out
gosh.
warp drive? Do you think we can figure out anti-gravity?
There's so many crazy things that are possible just because again like the idea of the quantum mechanics, right? Like the idea of because basically in quantum mechanics wormholes do exist, right? And in our observed reality we assume that wormholes do exist. The issue is they're just so small that as they open up they don't cause any actual damage. They aren't perceivable, but they're there. So theoretically speaking, if we could find a way to access these wormholes and widen up the hole into them, we could actually create like spatial travel from one destination to another. So that's an interesting theory I heard, or that I read in a journal. Another one was that Stephen Hawking actually published, I believe it was like three main ways for time travel to be possible, and all of them involve these incredibly complex machines to be created, and this really in-depth understanding of these different functions of physics and gravity. Like one of them was creating a deep space shuttle to like literally travel close to the speed of light into deep space and then come back. Because as you're going to that speed, space will literally warp around you, like you mentioned earlier, where everything is kind of just being bent and warped around you to match your speed. That way you can't actually exceed the speed of light. So while theoretically speaking, maybe you are to somebody, in reality, the universe is literally bending around you so you can't do that. But as it does that, so does time. So you would travel through time slower than the world around you. So you would technically be able to travel through time at a slower rate, therefore traveling to the future at a better rate than anybody else.
Does it make sense to send organic material, people, plants, animals through space? Or do we just do it like we do now and send drones and robots and sensors?
I think you have to just for the experience, honestly, just for like the human condition, you have to send people to space. Like the amount of people who were fascinated and inspired by the moon landing, right? Which is our closest satellite. The people that were like amazed by that and driven forward. I'm pretty sure NASA made so much more money off of that than they ever have before, because like it's a thing of like, wow, humans did this. This is a provable human experience, and the fact that like a small team of people did it means that anybody can probably do it. It's just that idea of one person opening the door and allowing others through it. So it's like if you just do that on a larger scale with maybe going to Mars, for example, or just having like the I know people were talking about building like space hotels and things like that. Like if you were
Yeah.
to able to do that and make that more available to people, then that would create like a whole new interest in like, okay, well, now that I see it's actually happening, now that things are moving, maybe I can actually do this. So I
Yeah,
think
you're right. I mean,
absolutely we need
I guess
people.
I guess it's kind of one of those things that once you practice it and get better at it, then you're like, yeah, that does sound possible. Because yeah, on my short
Yeah,
bucket list is to go hang out in a space hotel.
exactly. See,
I don't have
exactly.
much on that, but I'd love to have like even a moon hotel. Let me play around in
Mhm.
1/7 gravity, and maybe we can play
Actually,
handball. Who knows?
really interesting is that somebody created a blueprint of like actually having a moon colony, like a working moon colony with today's like technology, which is insane.
Yeah, 3D printing is one of these key technologies that's
Yeah,
come out
absolutely.
that's going to be really helpful in this, right? One of the things they're talking about in this book that I'm reading is being able to build buildings with just the
Mhm.
dirt that's around the ground and a 3D printing machine, right? So
Yeah.
that's the raw extrusion material that they form together to build structures that are habitable.
Mhm.
That way, you don't have to ship materials to the space or to the
Yeah,
moon or wherever like that. You just kind of use whatever they find around and build stuff from it with a 3D machine of some sort. So
exactly.
when we talk about quantum a lot, I mean, and we're
Mhm.
seeing the advent of quantum computing with optical computers.
Right, which is insane.
What are you hearing about this? Because because you're in the academic world now,
Mhm.
you must be seeing a little bit more about this than I've been seeing. What have you been hearing?
I know Google's been like the leading person on that right now of just actually getting technology down, like to be squared away. But
Which seems
like,
odd, right? Because what are they going to do? They
yeah,
just they
I
wanted to
mean,
figure out another way to make us subscribe to something because you've already
maybe
got me on 10 subscriptions a month. I'm paying for YouTube. I'm paying for Google. I'm paying
right.
for Gmail. Like what? How much
I'm
more do you
guessing they
want me to
just
pay
want
you?
like bigger servers just so they can expand even further, which is insane because they're already literally everywhere on the planet. But I mean, I guess hey, when you're a business that's like succeeding, why not go further, right?
Yeah,
But
of course. If you're not growing, you're
yeah,
dying, right? I get it, but
exactly. Yeah.
at the same point, like, why don't we have more public interest universities, research facilities that have access to these optical computers to figure it out before Google says, oh, let me figure
Oh,
out another way to get your 1 gigabyte of storage up to 100 gigabytes so I can charge you more.
it is literally like the dirtiest part of science, which is money. It's
Yeah,
literally just like grants and who's willing to pay for what. Because when you're an actual researcher, you have three main methodologies of making money. There's private, public, and then government funding, right? So with government funding, you're literally a contractual researcher. You are doing whatever they want you to do. You have no
yeah,
say, no choice whatsoever. It's like
sure,
working a regular job. Then private is like you are being approached or you approach somebody for funding. So usually it's a bit more of like your own personal say, but it's still very, very restrictive and it's a lot less of a budget. And then public is this holy grail of like I can do whatever I want to do, but you have maybe a third of the money as everybody else, which is almost unrealistic in terms of actually getting anything done. Meanwhile, you have these big businesses like Google, for example, like Amazon, who are pushing forward these massive boundaries in engineering because they have the resources. They have their own private funding they can just give to whoever they want to and have their own interests protected. So it's
yeah.
like it's literally just like the unfortunate part of science right now is that it is a business, especially in America. It is a business like through and through, and that is very, very disappointing, honestly. Like for me personally, just because like having the freedom to research what you want to do and push forward boundaries should be like a natural thing with science, but instead our hands are being tied with money, restriction, red tape, all that stuff.
So the funding. I just read that chapter in the book that I've been reading. In the 60s, when we were trying to get to the moon,
Hmm.
funding was 14% of our GDP, right? Our gross domestic product,
Right.
14% of it went to NASA to figure out how to get guys in the moons. And there was over 100,000 people that worked on that. Over
That is insane.
100,000 people and 14% of our GDP. Now that number is 0.4%, 0.4% of our GDP
That's
is dedicated to NASA, and they're all scrambling to figure things out. We don't even have a government issued spaceship that can get people to the ISS. We've
yep.
been hitchhiking off of Russian ships for the last several years until Elon Musk came through and became America's savior with his Dragon and Falcons and things like that
Right.
that he's
Yeah.
got that is shooting people up there now. But that's a big point of contention because we
Hmm.
spend about 35% of our GDP on defense. we,
Exactly.
we spend that much money
Exactly.
building bombs and tanks and missiles to
Yep.
stop people from killing other people. We're all human beings and earthlings, but we spend a majority of our money just defending each other instead of spending any significant amount doing research and advancement.
I mean, what's funny is that with that budget, they actually are doing research and advancement in the military. It's just all militarized stuff.
Right.
Like if you go to any research institute and you go to like the internship fairs or like the job fairs, I promise you, a majority of the businesses there are going to be military government contractors almost every single time.
Yeah.
Like the
How
amount
to
of people
build
I've
better
heard.
lasers, how to build better
Exactly, yeah.
armor, how to
How
build
can I build
faster.
this better jet? How can I use physics to help me get this missile down the ground faster? Like
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing that like we're putting our research towards. Instead of funding things like NASA or like instead of making like funding more public and making it easier to access, we're literally militarizing science.
Yeah. I
And
mean, you know why? Because
crazy.
science doesn't have the emotional impact that
Exactly.
fear of terrorism does. You're like, oh, we
Yeah.
have to spend anything we need to stop a terrorist,
Mhm.
even if this means that we're going to be stuck in the Stone Ages for the next 10 years because we spent all our money building tanks that no one needs.
Yeah, like that's where like the idea of education comes in. Like if more people understand this, if more people are interested by these topics and by physics and by science, you'll have more people wanting to actually do proper research, wanting to like learn more about the universe, about the world, the ocean, everything. Like the
Do you
more you
do you,
educate people, the better it'll be.
do you think popular media and like sitcoms like Big Bang Theory and Young
Oh,
Sheldon and stuff like that is helpful or hurtful for the
hurtful.
next generation of scientists?
In my opinion, it is hurtful. Like
Okay.
just because like it paints the image of the stereotypical awkward nerdy like hi there like the guy who will like sniffle every 5 seconds and fix his glasses every 10. Like it's just it just it hurts the image overall because you have people I like there are genuine like incredible athletes at the university that I go to. There are these athletes who they would think, oh, they're popular kids, they're cool kids. They're not doing physics, but they're doing engineering and they're doing like these like more science STEM oriented stuff. It's like you don't have to be a certain archetype of person or a certain like way of like mindset to do these things. Anybody can do it. But
So you
these
think
shows like Young
it kind of
Sheldon,
does a
like
disservice because it says, oh, if you're okay with being a nerd, then you should get into scientist. But
exactly,
if you want to have some kind of balanced social life and personal life
don't do it.
and be a scientist, well, that's not going to work because Big
Yeah.
Bang Theory shows that you have to sit here at a whiteboard and make weird
Mhm.
equations all day long and be awkward with females.
Exactly. But even worse is young Sheldon because it teaches kids that, like, hey, if you're not innately born with this talent, if you are not naturally gifted, we don't want you. You cannot be a part of this. You will be blown out of the water by people who are born with 500 IQs, which isn't realistic at all. Like
Yeah.
anybody can be born with natural talent. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You could be like naturally gifted with amazing athleticism. If you don't put practice and time into that, it's not going to matter in the end of the day. Anybody who works hard and actually goes for what they want to go for will always beat out natural talent every single time if they work hard enough for it. Every time.
Yeah. And it's so relevant too. And I feel like it's satisfying. Have you made any discoveries or has anything happened recently that's been revealed that you're like, oh man, I'm proud of scientists for figuring that out? This was a big breakthrough in physics in the last year or two. Anything that's that
Yeah.
sticks to top of your mind?
Well, it didn't happen recently. It was a while ago, but there's actually been progress made in researching dark matter and dark energy with a team of, I want to say it might have been Princeton. I'm not sure. I'll double check. But a team of like university scientists creating a literal radio to help detect the frequencies given off by dark energy. That way we can actually see where it is and how it's interacting with matter around it.
Because from as far as we know, there's dark matter in our own solar system. Yes.
Yes, dark matter is like currently perceived to be the border between every single galaxy. That way they don't just consistently collide and orbit around each other and just crash and destroy everything.
Okay, so it's the border around the Milky Way galaxy. So it's not necessarily
Right.
in our solar system. So it's kind of interstellar between galaxies.
For the most part, yeah,
And
it's a
so,
general
because I've
understanding
heard
of it.
some things saying like, that now they have estimates that of the known universe, 70+% of matter is
Yeah.
dark matter, right?
Yes, and we can't perceive it at all, which is
You can't
insane.
perceive it. And so they're getting these numbers, but now you're starting to say that there's instruments they're devising to be able to detect this a little bit better and understand their principles. Because
Potentially,
we
yeah.
don't know much about dark matter, except that it seems like it's a lot of it
Mhm.
and we don't know much about it.
The one thing we're sure of is that it exists in some capacity. Whether it's what we're expecting, no idea, but it most definitely exists.
Why did they call it dark matter and how's it different from regular matter?
Oh yeah. So this is my favorite thing about physics, actually. And I love this to death, and I will always talk about this. Physics has this amazing ability to just name things as they are. Like the reason why it's called dark matter is because we are in the dark about what it is, and we know it's a form of matter.
Aha.
That's literally why it's called that, and I think it's so beautiful. I love the simplicity of it. But essentially, what makes it different is that when you have regular matter, that's what we're literally made out of, and everything else around us in the universe is made out of regular matter. So when it interacts with regular matter, there's an actual like observable action that happens and a consequence of that reaction that happens, right? So whether it's gravity, whether it's one of the other like four fundamental forces of nature, um, whether it's like any regards to anything, if it's made out of matter, you can observe the consequences of it and observe the reaction it has with the other object. With dark matter, all we can really perceive are the consequences of it existing. We can't actually like come in contact or observe dark matter because of how it works and what it's made out of. We
We just
literally
have,
just don't know.
you have to kind of plug it into the equation because that's how the gravity works to make sense of how things orbit in the universe.
Exactly. Yeah. Like in the models we use for the universe, it's literally like we have to have this placeholder in there. Otherwise, nothing exists. And obviously, that's not the case because I can talk to you, I can perceive you, people can hear my voice. So,
With the dark matter, it's interesting because I'm also reading a book on the periodic table of elements, and
yeah.
I was like, I was thinking about dark matter. I was like, I wonder if the elements that make up dark matter aren't on this chart.
Oh, absolutely not. No, there's no way because we would be able to actually perceive it and interact with it if they were.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. So
Mhm.
there's a whole different table of elements for
Yeah.
dark matter, and so
Yeah.
the current table of elements only applies for matter that we have figured out here on our areas. But
Yes.
outside of our galaxy,
Mhm.
dark matter's got a whole another table of elements, maybe another 132 different elements on there.
Yeah, like honestly, what's crazy, like this is one of the things where it's like the possibilities really are endless. Like this really could just be anything. It could be a particle. It could be like a fourth state of matter. Like not fourth. Whoa, sorry. It could be like a fifth or a sixth state of matter. It could be like a thing from a different dimension. Like anything is literally possible. Although if you go to a researcher and say some insane idea, I'm sure they'll explain to you why that's not accurate. But technically speaking, the possibilities are endless.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy to see. And like the next generation of physicists could find that out and they could discover it if just more people understood like how foreign these things are, like how open physics is. It's not stale whatsoever. It's like there's so many new things to discover within the field, and everybody is just missing out on that because of how they were taught it in like high school.
Well, how soon before AI computing starts solving more of these problems than we do?
That's a fantastic question. Because at the end of the day, like the first stage for any AI to be created is to be programmed by a person. So it's like it's always a question of how good can somebody program this AI? Because you have to give it bounds, you have to give it limitations, you have to like give it, okay, I'm going to input this into your system, and using this like database of queries and information, you can answer these questions and build a repertoire of databases off of that, and go on from there on your own automatically. So technically speaking, like there's a way of it so it's like for a very long time they're not going to be able to solve any problems that we can't already solve. Um, but I know that in the medical field they're trying to use AI to better regulate or better understand the heartbeat monitors and what they mean, try to like predict what's going to happen. Because right now the technology is very old and very archaic. So people are trying to develop apps and like AI to help detect that and build like a database for it, which is really interesting. So I think like in regards to that kind of field, maybe 10, 15 years possibly. But like for greater, grander things, it's like it's always a matter of how good can we really code it.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever see Social Dilemma from a couple years ago, they'll tell you that they don't even know how the AI works anymore that they made, and
Yeah,
it's doing it on its own. So in some aspects, AI is better than people already, right? In
that's
terms
fair.
of
Yeah.
targeting advertising, in terms of filtering posts on your social media to make sure that you're paying attention and you're locked in and looking at that screen in your feed more and more. uh, and it's all AI developed technologies, right? The people aren't
Yeah, it's
doing that
true.
anymore, right? So there are some areas where that's happening, and I
Mhm.
think also in the realms of like DNA understanding and decoding, they're using a lot
Right.
of AI to be able to do that because it's
Yeah,
just
you
too
have
many
to.
billions of lines of code to figure something out. As soon as the
Mhm.
number is over a couple thousand, I mean, it's out of human management.
Yeah.
In terms of at that point, you have to have computers and spreadsheets and ideally AI to solve it.
Absolutely. I think in that regard, you make a great point where it's like you really do need, they are ahead of the times right now where it's like we can't really keep up. But I think also in part of like, it's more a thing of just there's so much data for us to analyze and understand that we just can't keep pace with them rather
Yeah,
than AI being more intelligent than humans. I don't think it's at that point yet.
it's getting close.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. Like it's going to happen eventually. But
Yeah. That's it's going to be interesting what the implications are going to be when that happens. Well, Adrian, it's
yeah.
been cool spending some time with you. Any last thoughts before we clip this message here?
Yeah, just book Demystifying Physics is coming out. I'm working on publishing that right now. Content's already there. So if anybody wants to learn more about that, you can just follow me on Instagram at a Lucio with two zeros at the end of it. I'm also on LinkedIn and then also on or just email me at a Lucio1474 gmail.com. I'm always open to requests and conversations. So yeah, of
Awesome, Adrian. Hey, thanks for joining me on another great episode of
course.
I've Got a Theory. It
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
was good theory. I'm glad you're on. Please like, comment, subscribe, and we'll have to connect with you again soon when you get your book out.
Sounds great. Yeah, we'll do.
All right, take care, Adrian.
You too.